Matthew chapter 24. In Matthew 24, it seems that the apostles are asking the Lord 3 questions. They're asking him, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? And it seems that Jesus chooses to answer them in a reverse order. I believe there's a reason for that. First, in verses 5 to 14, he tells them about when the end shall come. Then in 15 to 31, he says, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man. And you can see this in verse 30. And then he says, starting in verse 32, he says, now learn. Notice he doesn't really end at the end of chapter 24, but goes right on with his discourse into chapter 25. All these that he tells them are to prepare them for the when. Here we have a chart outlining all the verses and a summary in the middle and the 3 questions. You'll notice first, and starting at verse 4, he starts by giving them a warning, but he says that the end is not yet. He says, don't be deceived, there will be false Christs and rumors, but the end is not yet. Then he talks about upheavals in countries, famines, pestilence, earthquakes, and these are just the beginning of sorrows. There would be killing of Christians. Many would be offended, betrayed, false prophets. Sin abounds, the love of God grows cold, and those who hang on will be saved. And then the gospel would be preached worldwide. Then shall the end come. He answers the 3rd question. You can see in that verse, then shall the end come. The end as we know it. Then he goes on to say, gives them a warning about when the end would be. When you see the abomination, flee, pray, because then there's going to be great tribulation. Beforehand, there will be tribulation. We have tribulation today, and in the first 3.5 years, there will be more tribulation, but the great tribulation doesn't start till the last 3.5 years, because this tribulation is going to be like it was never before. And that's why the days would have to be shortened. He tells them, don't believe rumors of false Christs, because there's going to be false Christs and false prophets that will be arising and showing signs and wonders, and if it were possible to deceive the elect. But he's telling them beforehand so that they don't believe it and don't go after them. He says that when the Son of Man comes, it will be fast. And it will be when the bodies and the vultures are gathered. And it will be after the tribulation of those days, after this great tribulation that he's just talked about. The great tribulation, then shall be great tribulation. And after the tribulation of those days, the sun would be darkened, the moon would not give her light, stars would fall, and heavens would be shaken. And then he goes on to answer their 2nd question. What would be the sign of his coming? He tells them, then the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and that's when tribes would mourn. Christians aren't known as tribes. There shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes mourn. And they shall see the sign of the Son of Man. At the rapture, all the tribes of the earth are not going to see the sign of the Son of Man. And he's going to be coming in the clouds with power and great glory. This is talking about the end times when Jesus comes back, clothed with a robe dipped in blood, with all the angels and with all the saints before him. But hold on. Jesus says here, as in the days of Noah, before the flood, they knew not until the flood came. So also shall the coming of the Son of Man be. On to explain. 2 will be in the field, 1 will be left. 2 women shall be grinding at the mill, 1 shall be taken, the other left. Watch therefore, for ye know not what hour your Lord doth come. But know this, if the goodman of the house had known in which watch the thief would come, he would have watched, and would not have suffered his house to be broken up. Therefore be ye ready, for in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh. This is 2 different events. This is a picture of the rapture, when nobody knows when the coming of the Son of Man shall be. It will be like in the days of Noah. Life will be going on. People will be eating and drinking and partying like we're doing today. People don't even see the things that are coming on the earth as it is. And all of a sudden, people are going to disappear. But here, there has been great tribulation. All kinds of things are happening. The sun is dark and the moon gives her blood. And then appears the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And that's when he shall send his angels with a great trumpet. They shall gather the elect from the four winds of heaven to the other, all those that have remained alive during the tribulation at the end times will be gathered together. You notice in verse 31, he shall send his angels with a great sound. This is not the seventh trumpet. This is not the last trumpet. This is at the end of time. This is after the seven seals, the seven trumpets, and the seven bowl judgments. This is at the end, when he comes back again, after everything has happened. Notice also that he gathers his elect from the four winds. There's no mention here of meeting him in the clouds. There's no mention here of resurrection of the dead. There's no mention of the shout of an archangel. This is a different event. And then he begins to answer the first question, tell us when shall these things be? I believe he kept this question till the end to answer because he wanted to go into a further explanation, but meanwhile wanted to answer their other questions first because the other answers were a little bit shorter. But the when was a longer explanation. Anyway, he says, learn. It's learn when Israel becomes a nation. Then all these things will begin to happen. That generation that sees Israel become a nation will not pass till all those things are fulfilled. Heaven and earth would pass, but his words would not pass. He says nobody's going to know the day or the hour when. It's going to be like it was in the days of Noah. They were eating and drinking before the flood until Noah entered the ark and knew not. So he's comparing the times before the when to the coming of the days of Noah. That would be like we're experiencing today. And then 2 would be in the field, 1 would be taken, and 1 would be left. So all the things are continuing like the days of Noah, but all of a sudden 2 are in the field, 1 is taken, 1 is left. 2 are grinding, 1 is taken, 1 is left. Something begins to happen. So he commands them to watch, for they didn't know what hour the Lord would come. You'll notice he does not end his discourse in chapter 24, but goes on to 25, giving them parables so they could understand the when. Know this, that if you'd have known when, if you'd have known that it was after 3.5 years after the abomination of desolation was set up, then you wouldn't really have watched as carefully as if you have no clue. So then he goes into who is a faithful and wise servant. And he's telling them how they should be acting while we are waiting. He talks about the 10 virgins and warns them again to watch, for you know not. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour when the Son of Man cometh. How should we act? We're told to watch for the Son of Man return. Then he talks about the giving of the talents. How should we act while we are waiting? And then in verse 25-31, he says, when the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. That's his final coming again. Again, he's reiterating that before his final coming, all those things would take place, and at the end, the nations will be judged. Notice even in the 3 parables he gives here. First is about the faithful and wise servants, and at the end the foolish servant is cut asunder, and he is appointed his portion with the hypocrites. After Jesus comes, those that are not his, those that are foolish, are not wise servants, will be appointed the 7 years tribulation to go through. Then he talks about the virgins. 5 are wise and 5 are foolish. 5 are taken, 5 are left. This is the rapture. So here we have how we should be acting before the rapture Here's a picture of the rapture, and then here's a picture after the rapture. He talks about the giving of the talents. And what happens to the foolish servant at the end? He is cast, the unprofitable servant is cast into utter darkness. When Christ comes back, this man would be judged. So to me, there's a little picture here of what happens before the rapture, during the rapture, and after the rapture. Here we can see a chart comparing Matthew 24 with the book of Revelation. You can see in verse 5 there are false Christs, and in verse 9, chapter 9, verse 11, there's the kings over the locusts named Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue his name is Apollyon. You also hear of the beast rising from the sea, the dragon, and when Satan is thrown out of heaven. You hear of wars and rumors of wars in verse 6 of Matthew. And at the second seal, the rider takes peace from the earth and people are killed. In Matthew, there's famines, pestilence, and earthquakes in verse 7. And at the third seal, we can see a rider brings famine. Then we see plagues of locusts, and there are 3 major earthquakes mentioned in Revelation in chapter 6, 11, and 13. You can see that they're killed and hated in verse 9 of Matthew 24. And in Revelation, the 2 witnesses are killed in Revelation 11. Chapter 12, the red dragon goes to make war with the remnant. And in chapter 13, verse 5, he makes war with the saints for 3.5 years. Then you can see in Matthew 12, chapter 24, verse 12, where the love of many will grow cold. You can see this in Revelation, where the people rejoice when the witnesses are killed, and throughout they repent not of their evil deeds. In 24:16 of Matthew, they're told to flee to the mountains. Revelation 12:6 and 14, the woman flees to the wilderness. In chapter 24, verse 21 of Matthew, there's great tribulation. And in Revelation 12, it says that the devil is cast out of heaven and he is wroth with the woman. And now starts the great tribulation. That'll be for 3.5 years. In verse 22 of Matthew, it says the days would be shortened or all would die. And throughout the book of Revelation, you hear of death and dying. And in verse 29 of Matthew, you hear about the sun, the moon, and the stars. And you hear about the sun, the moon, and the stars in Revelation 6:12, 8:12, and 9:2. Although in 9:2 it's about the sun and the air are darkened. In Matthew 24, verses 30 and 31, you see the sign of the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great glory. And you also see that in chapter 19 when the Lord returns with all his saints. And in those verses in Matthew, you also see where the angels gather the elect. And that's in chapter 14 where you see the angels reap. And then you see the wrath of God is in Matthew 24, verses 37 to 39. And in Revelation, from the time Satan is cast out of heaven to the end will be great tribulation or the wrath of God, a 3.5 year period according to Revelation 12. Throughout the Bible, we are given a number of signs and pictures that foreshadow what is going to be happen. Here you can see a group of signs that are very similar in Matthew, Luke, and Revelation. There will be false Christ, wars, famines, death, martyrs, and global upheaval. Here again you can see a comparison of the exodus of the Israelites out of Egypt to Revelation. During the time of the exodus was a time of affliction. So shall it be in the end times. We can see this, Isaiah says it, and it'll be the time of Jacob's trouble as mentioned in Jeremiah, and Daniel's 70th week mentioned in Daniel. It's also Revelation 6 to 19. They cry out to God, and God will command the oppressors to let them go. In Jeremiah and Isaiah you can see this. There will be 2 witnesses with miracles before their enemies. In Exodus you saw where it was Aaron and Moses, and in Revelation 11, 3 to 6 it talks about the 2 witnesses. The enemies also performed in Exodus 8:7, that when they put down the rod, that Pharaoh's consorts or whatever, they put down their rods and they became snakes as well. In Revelation 13, it talks about the enemies performing miracles. There will be judgments from God. There was the 10 plagues in Exodus, and Jeremiah talks about this, and there's also the 7-year tribulation period. God will protect his people. This happened in Exodus and also in Revelation 7:4, 12:6, and 14:16 as well. You can see where God is going to protect his people. The water was turned to blood in Exodus. In Revelation 8, 11, and 16, the water turns to blood. There were frogs in Exodus. There's going to be satanic frogs during the time of Revelation. There was a plague of locusts during Exodus. There's locusts in Revelation. There was boils and blains during Exodus. There will be the same during Revelation. There's hailstone from heaven in Exodus. There will be hailstones in the last days. There was darkness. There will be darkness. Hearts are hardened. Pharaoh's heart was hardened. In Revelation, you can see how their hearts are hardened. There's going to be death to multitudes, and you could see there was death to multitudes in Exodus. But Israel shall be delivered. Just as they were delivered during the time of the Exodus, they will also be delivered at the end of the tribulation. You can see this in Zechariah and in Romans. Here's a chart comparing Joshua and Revelation. Yehoshua, Joshua's name, is a variant of Yeshua, which is Jesus' name. It's about a military commander who's going in to dispossess the usurpers. It's a 7-year campaign against 7 of the original nations. During this time, the Sabbath was ignored and the Levites were involved. They were commanded never to go into war, and yet during the time of Joshua, they are in there. First, Joshua sends in 2 witnesses. Then there are 7 trumpets event, preceded by silence in heaven for half an hour. Enemies confederated under a leader in Jerusalem. One of the names of the leaders was Adonai Zedek, which means Lord of Righteousness. They're ultimately defeated with hailstones and fire from heaven, and sign in the sun, moon, etc. And in Joshua, at the end, the kings hide in caves. You can see the comparison with Revelation, how things are so similar. 7-year campaign, 10 kings or 10 heads, 7, how Sabbath is ignored. There are 2 witnesses at the beginning. Then we see the 7 trumpets after the time in heaven, silence in heaven. How the enemy, the Antichrist, will go into Jerusalem and he will call himself the Lord. But how they will ultimately be defeated. All the enemies will be defeated with hailstones, fire, signs in the sun and the moon and the stars. And the kings will be hiding in caves and saying to the rocks to fall on us. It's amazing the comparisons you can find throughout the Bible.